Hello everyone, my name is Bron Burr, and on behalf of the Schools Plus team, I'd like to really warmly welcome you to today's webinar with our special guest, Bec West, who you can see on screen with me, I hope. We are super delighted to welcome so many of you this afternoon to this first in what will be a series of 5 webinars in a teaching and learning showcase featuring several of our super sensational 2021 teaching fellows, all teachers and school leaders from across the country who have been recipients of the Commonwealth Bank Teaching Award in 2021. And of course, Bec is one of those people who were recognised in 2021, one of the 12 people. Look, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which each of us are joining today. And in particular, if I can acknowledge the Ngunnawal people where I am joining you here in Canberra, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge their role as storytellers and as leaders and early educators in our communities. A little bit about Schools Plus. Australian Schools Plus, or Schools Plus as we are commonly known, is a national not-for-profit set up to support schools to bring about change, and in particular to help close the education gap. And as you can see from the slide there up on the screen at the moment, since our commencement, we really have, with the support of our incredibly generous donors, many of them individuals, some of them corporates, to bring about significant reach and change in schools right across the country. How do we do this? We support schools by providing funding, obviously, and also coaching, as well as opportunities like today to share learnings and opportunities and challenges and experiences that have come from the teachers and school leaders involved in our programs. Of course, one of those programs is the Commonwealth Bank Teaching Awards, which we manage in partnership with the Commonwealth Bank and also the Schools Plus pioneers. It is in this context that we are really excited, as I've already mentioned, to be able to host this teaching and learning showcase. And as you can see up on the slide, there are 5 webinars in total. Our first today with Bec, and then 4 more throughout term 2. All of them touching on different topics and all of them being led by our terrific 2021 teaching fellows. Please put the dates in your calendars. Please pass them on to your colleagues if you think there are particular webinars that might be of interest to them, and certainly look out on social media for more details about each of those. We will promote it as we get closer to the dates a little bit more in more earnest, but please pop them in your calendar if you think they will be of interest to you and of help to you. I think that one of the team may well put a link to our next one on the 26th of May in the chat. So look out for that too. And if it's not, we will certainly share it with you after the webinar. But of course, today, it's my absolute pleasure to once again welcome and to introduce our special guest, Bec West, who's going to really lead us in today's conversation. Bec is Assistant Principal, Curriculum Instruction at Bonnyrigg Public School in Sydney, in New South Wales. She is, as I've already said, a 2021 Commonwealth Bank Award recipient. She was a top 10 finalist in the Global Teacher Prize. I think it would be fair to say she's a YouTube sensation, and I'm going to just simply say simply an amazing ambassador for our teaching profession. So it's our absolute pleasure to welcome Bec and to introduce you today, Bec. Clearly, locally, globally, you're known for your creative use of technology, including the series of handwriting videos, Clever Pickles, in your YouTube series, as well as instructional videos to support teachers on your main channel, Talk and Chalk. I'm expecting we're going to get a little flavour of that today, and I guess in particular, Bec sharing her experiences, her approach to supporting consistent teacher judgment in writing, brought to life really through her experiences at Bonnyrigg. A vibrant community, a vibrant multicultural community, where also there is a level of disadvantage that exists within the community. So really, really excited to hear your work, Bec, and it contextualised in that way today, and the learnings that we can gain from that. But look, really very quickly before I pass over to Bec, just a quick structure about the program today. I've obviously done a quick introduction now. I'm going to hand over to Bec, who will speak with us for about 35-40 minutes, and then we'll hand over for Q&A. And can I say thank you very much to those people who have already submitted questions. Really, really grateful for those. Bec will touch on some of those during her presentation, but we will also pick those up at the end of the session as well in the Q&A. And we really invite you, please, if you have questions that come to mind throughout the course of the webinar, please put them in the chat, and we'll feed those into the Q&A at the end of the session with Bec. Also, please, if there are questions that are coming up or ideas that are springing to mind, or something comes to your mind that you think others would benefit from, whether it be a resource, a link, please share it in the chat, and at the conclusion of the webinar, we will collate that and we'll share it back to you together with a recording of the webinar at the end. So please make the next hour one that's really helpful for you, useful for you, and to really enjoy the opportunity to have this conversation with Bec West. So on that note, can I hand over to you, Bec, and lead the way from you? Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll flick that share screen button, as we all do, while everyone has the awkward pause while I flip over. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction and for having me today. It's an honor to be kicking off the Teaching and Learning Showcases, and I can highly recommend the ones that are coming up. I've put them in my calendar, and it's not just because I love those people and I've met them. I know that the things that they have to share are absolutely valuable, and they're very passionate educators as well. If you need an afternoon to feel a little bit uplifted about great things going on in our systems, definitely join those sessions. Welcome to everyone. And if you're watching the recording, we'll make sure that obviously you can get a copy of this slideshow presentation. I'll share that with Schools Plus so that they can send that through to anyone who has registered. And I'm hoping that means that any of the links that I provide in here will be accessible through that PDF format as well. So, as introduced, I'm Rebecca West, and I am Assistant Principal Curriculum Instruction at Bonnyrigg Public School. Essentially, this is an instructional leadership role. We've had some title changes between last year and this year. The role is quite similar, but it is now a permanent role within the system, which is a great thing for all schools. And today, if anyone's working towards accreditation, these are the standards that I've identified we'll be accessing through this session. And again, this will be available in the PDF, so no need to scribble it down. You'll have it available later. So yes, this is my school and I love it. It's a bit soggy here at the moment with all the rain, but it's a great school nonetheless. Today I come to you from Bonnyrigg land, where the traditional custodians are the Cabrical people, and I acknowledge that for more than 60,000 years, this land has been steeped in education as culture and tradition was passed from generation to generation. Today, as educators, we pay homage to the tradition of storytelling as I share with you the knowledge that we have gained at Bonnyrigg Public School through our experiences to improve consistency in teacher judgment. I just love those pictures of the kids. And yes, I had to throw myself in there because who doesn't love a great photo with their kids? Normally it's selfies. We very rarely get pictures of us with our kids. So that is a treasure to be had. Much like the popcorn analogy of learning, our kids won't all develop their skill sets the same way or at the same pace. You know, you put the popcorn into the oil, they're all the same as kernels and they all pop at their own time. Some kids come to school with the fine motor and cognitive skills to see letters, to copy them, to start writing. Some kids will struggle to hold the pencil, to form shapes, or even draw a line. And these are just some of the gaps that we see in our classrooms when children begin at school. Those complexities that we have here around the socioeconomic status and the disadvantage that we have can create a very significant impact very early in life for our kids. So delving into our topic today, we have really stringent processes here to monitor assessment and data practices to ensure that we see what is demonstrated in the classroom is measurable, and so that we can identify any gaps as early as possible, providing ways to keep students from falling behind. This is exceptionally important for liaising with the various teams across the school. So you can see on this chart that we have here down the bottom right-hand side, our assessment and data practices funnel into the learning support team and other support programs. So this can include our EALD team. We have about 70% of students that are EALD. It can go into our Aboriginal education team as well, which is about 17, almost 18% of students here. And it helps us identify those intervention programs that the learning and support team could provide. So our areas of need inform the decision-making in regards to professional development. You can see on sort of the right-hand side there, literacy and numeracy appeal and resources. All of that data funnels into how we're going to target the needs of our teachers and our students. And it all impacts the way that we allocate our financial resources. And this could be staff, actual physical resources, or program implementation. So we're making sure that we're utilising internal and external assessment data to be able to triangulate what's going across the school. We currently have a rating of excelling, so we know that we're pretty on par with what we're doing so far. So getting into the crux of what it looks like for a classroom teacher. This is the collection and monitoring of raw data in a term snapshot for one class. So I've obviously cut bits out there so you can't see any identifying elements for our students. And you can see this is measurements throughout the year. Now, I know it's a bit weird to see a spelling from term 1 in here. Normally we would do it again in term 3, but this is a chart that was from last year to give you an overall context there. And obviously we didn't have that done in term 3 because we were in lockdown, but just to give you some idea of what was going on and what we identified. I highlight kids these colors based on where they're performing. So if they're highlighted red, it means that they're well below expectation. If they're yellow, it's just below expectation. If it's green, then they're at expectation. And if it's blue, then they're above expectation. Above expectation doesn't necessarily mean they're identified as high potential or gifted. They're just working above expectation as per the syllabus. So we notice, though, some inconsistencies here. So when I'm looking at the writing data here, and I've highlighted term 4, because I'll highlight this and then I have this conversation with the teachers. And I love the fact that I can sit down and highlight with my highlighters, get my Kmart highlighters out, and it makes me pay attention to what's going on for each kid. So as I go across this row, this student at the top here, I've got red, 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 red there in all these literacy elements. And that would be a conversation I would have with the learning and support team, or possibly the EALD team, depending on what is the priority area for that student. But if I look down this column, I've got lots of reds going on there. Whereas if I look at their reading data from last year, and their spelling data that we had for them, I see lots of green and blue. So it's a bit inconsistent there. Yes, we have some kids that will be able to read and spell and still have difficulty in writing, but to see it across an entire class like that was a red flag for me. And we were seeing this across all classes. So we started looking a bit more deeper into this and tracking things. I noticed our internal writing assessment data was getting worse and worse. More kids were being listed in the red and yellow based on those class assessments. So I had been tracking NAPLAN results dating back to 2015, and I noticed that the internal assessment trends did not match our external assessments, so NAPLAN specifically here. At first, we brought in some team-designed rubrics to try and work on this, some third-party sourced rubrics, some things that we found on the internet. This was pretty much up to each team to support what they thought would work best in their teams. And even though teachers had a common tool to use for assessment, it didn't really improve the inconsistencies that we were having when it came to the judgment of writing samples. And that big question, why? Like, why? We had a big conversation at a staff meeting just to talk about those discrepancies there. Sorry, back here where we had, 26% of K to 6 sitting at expectation, or 53% on track. On track means that maybe they're a bit yellow in that yellow section and they're almost there. But our NAPLAN data was showing there was only 20% of our kids in year 3 below national minimum standard, and 0% since 2016 of our year 5 students below national minimum standard. So I shouldn't be seeing all this red on our internal data. It just didn't align. So we had to look very closely at our own judgments and practices in regard to writing assessment and analysis. And this NAPLAN data provided evidence that the teaching practices were good. The kids were actually performing well when it came to that external summative assessment. And this had been over a long period of time. So the question really was, why are our internal judgments so low? Why so harsh? So this meant essentially for me, the teaching practice wasn't a priority concern. It was the judgments being used for writing assessments. My concern being is that if those judgments weren't accurately in line with our syllabus expectations, then are our programs actually aligned for what our kids could be doing? Are we possibly holding our kids back by having low judgments of what their performance is? Delving deeper into this, we realized there was a lot of teachers assessing in isolation. They were doing this stuff in isolation. So we needed to break the bubble. So shifting that practice from isolation and working towards more collaboration and more dialogue, rigorous dialogue about the syllabus, about assessment, about what's going on for our kids. And the best way to do that is through consistent teacher judgment meetings. So we have now allocated consistent teacher judgment meetings into the school calendar for once per term, where teams meet together with myself and their supervisor to go through writing samples from the class, and we analyse together. Each writing sample should be similar in content or topic or stimulus, and they may have even been a lesson that was team taught by the two teachers or with myself or with their assistant principal, mentor, supervisor as well. And this meeting time that we have is during the day during release time. And our teachers are also currently provided with 2 planning days per term with their team. So in the middle of the term, so week 5 this term, we've got it allocated. All of our teaching teams will have an entire day to go through planning together. And at the end of the term, they will have one as well, which means that we can focus on a 5-weekly cycle of what we're doing with the kids. We have that time to sit down, really reflect, really dive deep into what we can see with our kids, what's going on for our learners. We're not rushing this after school. We're not taking up teachers' personal time to do it. This is very, very important time, and we need to dedicate that time within our workday. When teachers sit down and engage in consistent teacher judgment meetings, they're working towards some of these standards. I'm sure you would find more in there as well, depending on what your focus area is, but quite specifically, this is what some of ours record. So if you've got any teachers on your team that are working towards accreditation to gain proficiency, these are some of the things that they could say they're working towards when they're engaging in consistent teacher judgment meetings. From that meeting, we create the writing sample wall. So this wall changes every time we have one of those consistent teacher judgment meetings. There is a class section for each teacher. So for example, this row going down here, that's one class, and then this row next to it is another class. That snapshot of term data sits at the top of the wall here so that we can look at other areas of learning. We've got that reading data, we've got that spelling data, we've got their EALD data that we can refer to when we're having conversations about their work sample. We've got these tiered intervention charts that sit here for each class, and you can see some post-it notes that we've written on. So going through, you can see we've got a work sample here from a teacher, and then we've got 2 post-it notes on each one. The post-it note on the left is what we can see that the student has demonstrated, just some dot points here that have come from the literacy learning progressions, the creating texts progressions. The post-it note on the right is what we're working towards, what we think is an area of focus for improvement. Writing these presented some really great conversations, and it helped us identify gaps in cohorts. So for example, by having it all up on this wall here, I could see the trend across all the post-it notes that teachers had on there. And we noticed in term 1 of last year, there was a very high need for us to focus on punctuation and editing skills. That just seemed to be a thread throughout all of the post-it notes that were on there, that was something that students weren't demonstrating in their writing. When we had our term 4 consistent teacher judgment meetings, we noticed a school-wide pattern on crafting ideas and vocabulary as an area of need. And it's an interesting thing to see sort of one snapshot of a class or even as a stage across it, but to see that need across the whole school, it makes us then think, well, is that an area for professional learning? Is this something that's in teachers' PDPs? And how can we support our learners as we move through this?
Bec,
So Oh, yes, Bronwyn.
Ron here. Can I just interject?
Yes.
Robin has just posted a question in the chat, and I just wonder if we answer it before we go on.
Yes.
And I think it referred to your very first slide, or one of your earliest slides actually. It says, on the snapshot of student data, there were numbers for the writing assessments. How were these obtained? How were these marks decided?
So these came from the writing rubrics that teachers sourced themselves for their team. So some may have gone on to Teachers Pay Teachers or Twinkle, or looked at some of the other departmental ones that are available on there. Because I didn't want to shove something down teachers' throats, I gave the team the choice to choose their rubrics. So they would give me, sorry, if I can go, can I go back? Hey, go back. Oh, here we go, back. I think it was, did I have the score or did I cut it off? It may have had an identifier. Oh, up here, I would have the total score that they could get for it. And then this was the score that the child achieved based on that rubric. So different classes may have had different scores. There could have been a score of 37 for one team and maybe a score of 20 for another. Some of those things may have had identifiers, which is why I've cut it out on there just to play it safe. So those scores that were on there, we then looked at what equates to above expectation, at expectation, below expectation to warrant what they got there. So again, you could see straight away, we didn't have consistency across the school in terms of which rubrics we were using. But again, it was a new process. This was us delving into this process of using rubrics to try and get that consistency. But we identified that teachers were still kind of doing it on their own, still not together. So their interpretation of that rubric might be a bit different, much like when we get a uni assignment back and we go, hang on a second, mine's a credit. We don't really know why.
Thanks, Bec. Thanks for backtracking there. Thanks.
No worries. Yeah, no. Yeah, let me know if there's any questions that I should jump on straight away, because I'm not looking at the chat. Okay, so honing in on what this looks like on the board there, we can see I said red was well below, yellow below, green at, and blue above. We had the samples in those colors. Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form to shame the teacher or to shame the student. This is a working wall for us to learn from. The whole idea being is that whatever we're seeing up here demonstrated and what we see as ideas for areas of improvement, we're noting this down and we're learning from it so that we can plan for that next 5-weekly cycle that we're putting into practice. So students and parents don't see this. This is just for teachers. This is a teaching wall or a learning wall for teachers. Down the side here, you can see we've got tiered intervention charts, and I've brought up a writing one here, which is for a different class, so it's not going to match. Don't try and match them. This is, again, me just trying to make sure I'm not identifying any students or teachers. Over here, you can see for writing, they're identifying which kids are falling into those categories there, what their focus area is going to be, and the strategies that they're going to put into practice in the classroom to support that focus area for that student. And this could be, you can see here, one says EALD support. So depending on the intensive nature of the support that that child needs, those are the strategies that's going into practice. This stuff here that's in strategies, that is what the teachers are using to inform their programs for differentiation. So they don't have to rewrite everything again. They know that this is how they are differentiating for those students on that particular focus area in writing. And this is really good for us when we're sitting down for a learning support team meeting, or even at the executive level, if we're trying to analyze what's going on in the school. This is all documented. We even have a counsellor will come out here and they're looking at this particular development of the child and they're going, okay, teacher's already doing this, this, and this, and they're still not getting progress. What else could be going on for the kids? Very transparent, very authentic, and it comes from the evidence that we've had here. This has led to intervention programs in the school, including Mini-Lit, Mac-Lit, and Quick Smart Numeracy, just because we've identified some of those needs across the school. Now, I wanted to refine this process because we can always get more stringent, and I don't want that to sound onerous, but we really wanted to refine this practice because I found that having the Post-it notes was very, very helpful. But without that visual there to sort of realize all those other gaps that we're missing, or all the areas of learning that kids are demonstrating, we were still finding inconsistencies in some of that judgment, and we could refine this process. So for the writing sample, I created this snapshot, which is our learning progressions. And you can see here, this is stage 2, and it's creating texts level 5, 6, and 7. And when we look at stage 2 progress, they should be somewhere between 5 and 8 by the end of stage 2. So I've got this snapshot here. looking at the data that we have. And then what the teacher would do is highlight what they could see the student demonstrating in this particular piece. Some of these things come from knowledge of what happened in the lesson. If I'm not there to see the lesson happening, maybe I haven't seen how they've crafted their ideas. So obviously that comes from teacher judgment, and I should trust my teacher's judgment. They know what they saw and they did with their kids. And then we would underline perhaps some areas of focus to work towards. So what this looks like now, yes, it's a little over the top, but I changed the wall to go from red at the top to being blue at the top, so it matched the charts just to make it easier to follow. So now we have our blue, our green, our yellow, and our red with much more detailed analysis about what we can see in that particular sample. And the teachers quite often now bring to the table as well other samples that they know reinforce that demonstration of learning. So those of us who are tracking any of that data using the learning progressions, we know we can't just see that demonstrated once and then say, yes, that's a mastered skill. So the conversation at that table is around, no, I've got evidence here that this child did this in this sample and this sample and this sample. And yes, they are absolutely working at this particular level. And now our tiered intervention charts reflect specifically the progressions. So if I go back to that other chart, it just had focus areas and some strategies on there. And it may have listed, for example, writing simple sentences. Right now, this comes out directly from the creating text learning progression. It's very specific about what those kids are working towards and the strategies that they're going to use for differentiation in their program. This again helps anyone who's doing an intervention program because they know what the teacher is working on in the class very specifically. It means that our learning and support teacher can help provide supports for these in the classroom as well. And again, those other intervention programs make sure that they're either aligning with what the class teacher is doing or supplementing other areas that need reinforcement. And this has been working really well to get quality information. Doing this process brought to the forefront some of our preconceived notions and bias that comes when we're writing. Writing is so unnatural. It's not an easy thing for our kids to learn, especially when we have barriers like language barriers, or if they have come from that impoverished background where they have no experience. So if we're going to write a story about the beach and they've never been to the beach, we're missing a lot of vocabulary there that they need to be able to engage in that at a high level. We noticed that these pieces that teachers would bring out and put up there, we could make some assumptions about it as well. So some of those kids that have presented something that's really messy, it's missing punctuation, it's lacking the paragraphs and the structure, could still have really amazing content, really good language, and really insightful ideas. But sometimes we're chucking that into the pile like, oh my gosh, that's one of my low kids. Not actually getting that content together and getting the learning progressions there to go, hang on a second, tick, 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 I can see all these things. Sometimes those kids who are our beautiful kids that are always doing the right thing, they're right at the front, they're always our helpers, they present beautiful handwriting, they've got their paragraphs and their punctuation, but it could be repetitious writing, it could have really poor use of vocabulary, and it could have really irrelevant content. When we look at some of those ones and we go, well, hang on a second, I'm not actually ticking much off here on the learning progressions. It's when we need to leave our bias and our judgment and our assumptions at the door when it comes to writing. And again, saying to ourselves, why so harsh? Don't be so harsh. Let's actually find the evidence and see what it aligns to.
Yes. Sorry, Bec, Bron here again. Just another question here from India. Question is, there are 2 tiered intervention charts next to that work sample. What is the difference between the two? So you might just need to bounce back to the slide, sorry, just before we move on.
Oh, sorry, these ones here, is this what we're talking about?
Pretty sure 2 tiered intervention charts next to that work sample.
So that would just be 2 different classes. So you can see there's 2 more down here waiting for the classes on the other side that's on display. So if I go back to here we go. Here's a good one. So for example, this is one class. This is another class. So this chart here would belong to one of those classes, and this chart here would belong to another class. This chart down the bottom belongs to one on the right-hand side that you can't see in the picture, and so does that one. It's just me trying to fit it all in the wall.
Fantastic.
Hope that answers that. It may look a bit chaotic for those that haven't worked with it, but trust me, our teachers know where their chart and their kids are. and we make sure that they're not doubling up on those students. So if there were 4 students on the wall in term 1, we have a reflection on how those kids are going and how they've improved, and then we get a new set of 4 kids to put up on that wall. So what we did was we used some of the ACARA student samples to help align to the syllabus and the expectations, because those conversations we found about why so harsh is just us having high expectations of kids. And that's a good thing. High expectations we know can lead to impactful success for our kids, especially in regards to writing. But when we pull up these samples that go, well, here's what a year 1 example looks like, and you look at your kids one and you go, oh, that's very similar to what a student should be doing in year 1. They're not as low as I think they are. So I've got the link in there, and you'll see examples like this. So quite literally, we had some of our samples out that looked exactly the same. I've just realized I've put the same picture twice there. So looking at it, they would go, oh, okay, that looks really similar to what my kids are producing. They're on track. This is an example of a satisfactory level for year 1. And I really like the fact that ACARA have put these into grade levels, because as a New South Wales teacher, we have stages which goes across 2 years. And some of the hard things we find within that consistent teacher judgment is knowing, well, what does the beginning of year 1 look like compared to the end of year 1, and the beginning of year 2 compared to the end of year 2. So this is really good in having those examples. And you can see over here on the left, the menu has files for above satisfactory, satisfactory, and below satisfactory. So even if you've got those kids where you're thinking, well, are they low? Are they really, really low? Are they just not quite there yet? There are some examples on there that you can use to help you align that judgment as well. NESA have some work samples too, so the link is on there for you, and that's what the website looks like. And these are some of their examples. They have some in there based on those grades. So a C grade would be at expectation. And this is an example of mid stage 1 and end stage 1. So that's working with our language of the syllabus. Personally, I like using both. The more samples, the better alignment we can get, and the more we develop that consistent teacher judgment as we go throughout. The great thing about this was the moment of relief I could see across teachers' faces when they would look at these samples and they would go, oh, okay, my kids aren't that low. It's like, no, you're doing a great job. Your teaching is great. Let's not be so harsh. Just having that conversation was really good. And once we get past that barrier where teachers think for whatever reason that they're not doing a good job, we can get to the crux of what can we see our kids doing and what can we focus on moving forward from here. It really, really requires you to have that safe environment for teachers to be open about their frustrations of what's going on in the classroom. There is no judgment. If a child is not progressing and a teacher is struggling as to why, that's a conversation that we delve into with openness. It really needs to be supportive, and sometimes it can take time. This has been something we've been doing for 2 years now, and we're still refining our practice. And those conversations are a back and forth as we go through. And sometimes you won't necessarily see that change happen for a few terms until they've had a few goes at doing it. Another way that you could do this is by using the NAPLAN examples. There are NAPLAN examples, and then there's marking criteria as well. Mark some of the NAPLAN samples, look at the NAPLAN marking as well, and see how well you're marking compared to their marking. Were you on track? Were you marking harder, easier, or about the same as well? So some resources that you could use if you want to coordinate some sessions with your team, and you do not have to be an official leader to do this. If you're someone on your team that thinks, do you know what, I feel like I'm not in line with my team or those judgments, and I want to improve on that, there's some great resources. So ATSL has a section in there that's called moderating work samples. There's a video in there of a school that's gone through this, and it talks about a real world numeracy task, and there are some prompt questions, some discussion questions, and some great examples on what it looks like to sit down with a colleague and try and align what's going on in your classroom for student achievement and assessment. This now delves into professional learning. So quite specifically for us, this is where we are at right now. So after, I say 2 years, but we know that's been COVID impacted. So let's say a year of actually doing stuff. We've identified some areas of need for professional learning with our teachers. So now that we're getting more in line with each other, we're using a consistent model of Judgement, which is our creating text learning progressions. We now know that we're utilising consistency across the school in terms of our resources and our practices, and we've identified those areas for improvement. So kindergarten this year have been looking at the draw, talk, write, share process and guided writing to support their kids and how they're going. For years 1 to 3, they're doing professional learning on the writing revolution and read the text on that. And we are implementing various things in the classroom, which has led to the change of some of our scope and sequences and our teaching programs. And years 4 to 6 have been working on an action research project on vocabulary, and that started last year. That's been continuing into this year. It means that they have attended professional learning. They have lots of collaborative dialogue meetings together to really nut out what's going on for their kids. They've collected videos of the kids in the classroom to be able to reflect on together. So even if they can't all be there for a lesson that's team taught, they can share the video of what's going on in their classroom with each other and be able to engage in that quality dialogue as well. And this has meant that as an executive, we've been able to monitor what's going on for our teachers. It means that our budget is going directly into professional learning that we've identified as a specific need. We are seeing improvement in writing samples as well across the school, but more appropriately, obviously, we're seeing that consistent teacher judgment improving across the school, and it makes it easier to have data conversations when we're all referring to the same thing and having that common language around what we expect to see with our kids in writing. Now, when it comes to the summative monitoring, our kids just sat NAPLAN. So we'll see how our data goes this year and how that aligns to those external documents. I know, and you know, it's not the be all and end all, but this is something that we've been using to see how we align with those external measures that are going on and how it aligns to those expectations our kids have at stage expectation. This year, instead of just tracking student data, those raw scores that are on there, we'll also be very closely monitoring how well it aligns with those other assessments we're using to triangulate data. So even though this focus specifically that I'm sharing with you today is all about writing, we've noticed that there are other pockets in mathematics where there's a little bit of inconsistency in our assessment judgment as well. And all we're going to do is transfer the knowledge of practice that we're learning in this process to how could we do that to reaffirm what we're doing in other areas of learning. Very transferable. The key thing that we need to take away from this is consistent is not the same. Like this teacher who spent 40 years wearing the same outfit to have his photo taken at school. This is not consistency. This is the same. When we talk about consistency with our teachers, we don't want them mimicking what the teacher next door is doing. It doesn't need to be a replication of what they're doing because we know every classroom is different. Every kid is different. It's more about embedding those consistent practices across the school to make sure that we're prepared for change in our rooms as well. If you're suddenly gone from year 6 to year 2 and you have no idea what year 2 work samples look like, there's a practice in place ready for you to work with your colleagues, to have samples ready to go, and then align your judgments based on very clear demonstration of learning with your kids. And as teachers, we constantly need to modify our practice all the time. And what kindergarten work looked like when I was at school is definitely different to what kindergarten work looks like now with our littlies coming in. So our expectations and our modifications are just part of that educational cycle as well. So I know I've got some questions on the paper here. I'm not sure if you want me to go through those ones first, Bronwyn, or if there's any others that have come up.
Look, there are, and I do encourage other people to post for other questions. But look, there is one here, Bec, and it just links directly back to sort of your commentary then from Deb. And it was, how do you ensure you keep up your writing practices when you move to numeracy, for example, or whatever the subject may be, I guess.
As in integrating, is that what we mean?
Well, yeah, I guess, how do you ensure you keep your I guess the focus, keep the standard there, I guess, is the question.
Well, obviously, because we're a very EALD school, we focus a lot on making visual resources, anchor charts, those go-to supports that are there. So we're including that in mathematics as well. So an example I'm thinking of when I was working with one of the year 2 classes is building a vocabulary wall around mathematics. So if it was money, for example, that we were focusing on, a lot of our kids, they just know buy. They go and buy at the canteen. That's it. And then they're struggling with past tense. So we would use those opportunities to try and focus on making sure we had those word walls that we would develop together with the kids. It would almost be a literacy numeracy activity at the same time. When it comes to the writing practice itself, I still think integration is the key for most things. So one of the things that I'm doing right now with year 2, the kids are all reading My Place with their teachers, and we're incorporating writing structures from the Writing Revolution program, and we're just linking it up with My Place and history. So we're keeping that content from the history learning into the focus where we're doing sentence structures, commands, questions, statements, and exclamation. And we're just using the content from history to try and pull that across. So I can't teach without integration. Honestly, I think it's a fun way to learn.
Much more fun. Yeah. Look, thank you, Bec, for that response. And I'm sure if, please, Deb, if that didn't quite answer your question, please just post again.
Yes.
Folks, given the platform that we are using, just so that you know, unfortunately, you can't ask the question directly, and I will need you just to post. So I will endeavour to be that go-between for you as best I can. So please, any reflections, any questions, please post them. And I can see here one from Hannah Beck. Is this a project that all of your staff are involved in within a team? Do the teams engage with each other's findings?
So glad you asked this question, because I get to give a shout out to both Schools Plus and the Commonwealth Bank. The wonderful grant money that the school received as part of the Commonwealth Bank Teaching Award kickstarted all of this, I guess. We were looking many years back around collaborative practices with our teachers and trying to get our teams to work together, just in programming, trying to get that together, to people get their minds together and be able to create something that's really engaging for their class and maybe engage in team teaching opportunities. So we had started that when I received the award. And by that point, our conversation had kind of shifted into the fact that we were living in a bit of a bubble here at Bonnyrigg, quite literally. When COVID was everywhere around us and shutting down, we still didn't have anyone here with it. That's how much of a bubble that we had. It was a realization that we didn't really engage much with other schools or beyond our network. And we had some beginning teachers here who had never seen another school or teacher in practice. So we had someone who had started working here, who was a pracky here and started working here. And as amazing as their skill sets were, they were like, well, I've only ever seen these classrooms, and that's the Bonnyrigg mold. We want to see what else is out there. So this kind of engaged us in that idea of, well, what are we learning from other teachers, if not from each other? And then noticed even more so about teachers practicing in isolation. So it wasn't just that, not going to other schools. We weren't going to each other's classrooms either. So that grant money kickstarted this with a small team of collaborative practice. And now we're at the point where it's the whole school doing this. So it's across the whole school. So every class teacher engages in these CTJ meetings. And the supervisors are part of that as well. And those practices are now starting to stem off into the teams, into other areas as well too. So obviously the grant money helps provide, time off, professional learning, access to resources. So all of those books that we're providing come from that grant money as well. However, we've identified that it's working well. So even beyond that grant money getting exhausted, it will become part of our practice in the school to make sure that we're providing teachers with the time to do that. Again, I don't want to keep teachers back until 5 o'clock at night to do these things that we know are highly valuable. We'll find ways to embed them. We're finding ways to embed the planning days within our funding as it is. And that will just continue to transition that way as well. And we're finding this is probably a better use of funding for professional learning anyway, because it's highly collaborative and networked. It's stuff that we're doing together. It's much different than going to a one-day conference that you don't revisit and you haven't got your colleagues there to sort of bounce off. So if you're looking at starting something like this, I would recommend, start small if you can, and then showcase the great results with your executive to see if you can get some finances injected into either making it bigger or extending it for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Look, thanks very much, Bec, and I hope that goes some way to answering your question, Hannah, and I think it does. And obviously having application yeah, outside of that literacy space, as you say. I think that your whole approach there. Both India and Robin have bumped back with some further questions here too, Bec. One from India, going back to the tiered intervention pages, can you please explain a little bit more about creating the next steps tiered intervention pages? Are they based on the one work sample that's on the wall, or all students that have been ranked at that level?
Okay, so yeah, the tiered intervention chart comes from that knowledge that the teacher has of those students in the classroom. So as I said, they might bring some other samples along. They might bring the kids' workbooks along as well, or other samples that they might have just done as a blind sample, maybe with a random stimulus in the class as well, depending on what their focus is. The main thing is that we want teachers to have consistent work pieces to go with, but they'll bring other things along as well. So the creation of that tiered intervention chart is we sit there with all the kids' work samples. The 4 that go up on the wall, I've asked teachers to pick kids that they think they're having a bit of trouble with. So let's say, Johnny they've been identified as, one of these yellow kids, and they're thinking, do you know what? I'm struggling with this particular one. I really want to analyze this one while my team is here and can give me some input. There might be another kid that's sitting at yellow, but we know exactly why that kid is at yellow and what's going on for them and the intervention that we have in place. So there's no point sitting there and going into this mad, deep analysis around a child that we already have a lot of information about. So the 4 kids that go up are just our kind of focus ones for that particular meeting. So as we've had that conversation going on for those kids that we're a little bit unsure about, it means that when teachers go back and reflect on the rest of the samples on their class, they've had that input and that dialogue and had any questions answered to be able to analyze that one really, really well. I do have data talks allocated for teachers in my timetable as well. My door is always open for them anytime though. Even today, I had one teacher that came in and said, I'm just analyzing this maths thing and I'm really not sure what's going on with this kid. Can we have a chat? Always open for that. It's really hard to get through a whole class of deep analysis though. So the main thing is we're focusing on those tricky ones, getting those skill sets and understanding to the forefront of our conversation. And then that way, when the teacher's doing it independently, they'll have that better understanding of where we're aligning ourselves and judging kids against the samples. So when they do write that chart, we are using that sample to help inform us, but it's not the only thing. That's not the only piece of information we're using to create that chart. There have been times where a teacher has written that chart, gone away for 3 days and come back and gone, do you know what? I had another think about this. And I think based on blah, I want to change something. I'm not going to tell a teacher no, that's their judgment of what's going on in their classroom.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bec, and thanks, India, for asking that question so we could unpack that a little bit further. Really appreciate it. Quick one here from Robin, slightly different tack again. Are your teachers storing progression data on, I'll call it Alan, or physical paper progressions? What do you do to inform the next year's teachers of student progress?
Alan or Plan 2. It's not the most user-friendly system in the world, but it's an online system so we can access it. So they do store things on Plan, Alan. So they're updating those levels on there and ticking off if it's sometimes or always observed or not observed. And that's a good way for us as executive to be able to jump in and just see what's going on for those teachers. I like to export that into an Excel sheet because then you can see everything on the one sheet. It's much easier to see. And then I do my highlighting thing as well and see if those kids are behind or on track. The stuff where we're analyzing things against the progressions, that highlighting and everything, they can keep whatever informal stuff that they want to. And I've made it available for teachers for all of those stages where I've made a snapshot chart of what's going on for them. So we do have an expectation that once a term, they do need to update the creating texts sub-element on the learning progressions, the literacy progressions, so that we can just monitor that once a term and see what's going on for the kids. Internally, the main thing that we want to see from teachers is what happens in that meeting. So that summative sort of data's due, that's the plan stuff.
Thanks, Bec. And Robin, hope that went away to answering your question too. Can I, and this will reflect my ignorance here, is Alan, is it a New South Wales specific tool? I'm just thinking of that, or
It's a
not.
piece of software, but I think
Software?
some other systems use it as well. I've got a friend
Okay.
who's in a Catholic school, and I'm very sure she said that she uses it as well. So I don't know if your system has to give you access to it.
Okay.
But it's a software system where you go in and you just click the thing that you're ticking off on and put it in there.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I was just curious there. Bec, I'm just going to bounce to some of the questions that came through before at the time of registration, and there was one that some of these are more specific to teaching the writing, perhaps so. But I think the first question there, it was how to apply these skills to early stage 1, where there is so much diversity in learners' abilities and readiness to write. And I just wonder if you can sort of reflect on that context a little bit, and certainly in what you've been sharing today, and how that approach may help.
And we say so much diversity in stage 1, even in year 1, there's so much diversity. In year 2, there's so much diversity. And especially in an EALD school, that a lot of those layers will impact that. You'll have some kids that are purely independently reading off with a chapter book, and then another one that struggles to write their own name. That's the level of complexity that we have in our classrooms now. And COVID hasn't helped any of that. For us, those charts is what helps us cover that diversity. You can literally see, by no means whatsoever do we have kids in those groups and that's all they do. But let's say you're focusing on a particular area and you want to group those kids in a particular way. If you're focusing on vocab or sentence structure, you might go, do you know what? These are the kids that I know are struggling with vocab. They're the ones that I'm going to create a lesson around, differentiating for them and pull them aside so that I can be really targeted with them, while the others are doing some independent learning, demonstrating that learning, and be able to focus on them for that particular thing. And the idea being it's just flexible. So that's the reason that we have those charts updated regularly, because that focus area might change for those kids, and that helps us with our programming. I think the fact that we've been able to identify our pockets from being so rigorous with how we're looking at our judgments in how they're doing, that was our decision making for the intervention programs. We really went, these kids are sitting in a classroom and they're not soaking up the things that they need to be soaking up. They need to be in this particular program that will serve those needs. That's helped us as well, which can be really hard because it does cost money and it does take time to be able to do those things. One of the things that I took away most specifically from some of our PL was learning about core goals. And this really helped me with the differentiation across those abilities that you would have. And this was specifically for stage 1 that we were doing it with, so it works. I'll give an example. Say the lesson was trying to teach the kids how to write a complex sentence that included the use of an adjective. We're looking at, all right, what's the actual core goal here? Is the core goal the sentence, the punctuation, or was it adjectives? And when we discuss this in our programming, the focus is adjective. So those kids who are struggling to write a complex sentence, we just want to make sure they know what an adjective is and focusing on that part. It meant utilizing some of the SLSOs in the classroom to be able to divvy up those focus areas. But it means that when I'm creating those differentiated materials in the class as well, I know, okay, these kids over here, the focus is that sentence with an adjective. These kids over here, adjective. That's all I'm focusing on for them. I'm not creating a resource for them that's overwhelming, that they're not going to be able to successfully achieve. Because then when we still come back for the end of the lesson and we're reflecting together, this kid can still participate and tell me the adjective that could be used for a sentence. This kid over here can still give me their complex sentence that uses an adjective as well. So I think differentiation is hard at the moment. It's very, very hard. There's no one right answer. And one thing I would suggest is you can't do it for every lesson. You cannot, that I just said, for creating resources for this kid that's doing adjective and then that separate activity as well. There's no way you could do that for every single lesson that you are going to deliver. Pick those focus areas that come out of your data and your analysis and that deep conversation that you have with your team, and pick those focus areas that you're honing in on. Those are the ones that you more stringently differentiate and really target that flexibility of your groupings as well, because then I think you'll see more shift in that than trying to do it for everything. You'll just burn yourself out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I hope that went some way, in fact, to answering a couple of the questions that were posted around multi-year classes as well. So thank you very much, and just very practical advice about being realistic about what can be achieved too. Look, Bec, there is another question, and I guess it points a little bit back more to the presentation, and I guess your role in a way. Just there, do you have suggestions for schools who don't yet have an APCI or off-class staff to assist so they can efficiently manage this type of CTJ without adding lots of extra out-of-hours meetings into schedules? Great question, practical question, something that was swinging through my mind actually. How do we resource this? Yeah, so back to you, Bec.
So if you want to be creative with it, our staff here have their RFF at the same time, so that makes it easier for us. But if you're in a school where your team are off on different times as well, that makes it tricky. And yes, you shouldn't have to give up every afternoon to do something that's important to our teaching load. I would recommend submitting a professional learning application to your exec team to ask for a day or half a day for your team to be off together. It's valid use of money. It goes towards what we're doing. If you're making this case to your executive team, this will very likely be part of your strategic improvement program in strategic direction 1, which is student growth and attainment. There will be literacy and numeracy outcomes in there. So if you want to be really explicit and say, this is the thing that we're trying to work towards that will support our kids, it's worthwhile investing some of that professional learning money into allowing us time off class. Whether you can find a casual or not is a whole other question from the staffing shortage. That's what we're dealing with. The alternative could be is just talking to a supervisor and saying, look, we need some support running one of these consistent teacher judgment meetings. Could you suggest a way that you could provide that support for us to be able to do that? It could mean utilising some of the support staff and collapsing some programs for a day to do that, if that's within your means as well. It would be very hard to do if you've got some executives that have said, look, we're just too time poor, money poor, and staff short at the moment to do it. That would be tricky. But I would have that open conversation with your executive and just say, look, this is really important to us. We think it's really valuable for the kids, really valuable for our professional development as well. And just make that case with your executive, because I personally can't see a reason why you would say no to something that could be really great for your team and for your kids.
Thank you, Bec. Really, really appreciate that advice there. Just a really quick question here. I'm very mindful of time, folks, and we will try and finish right on 5:30, but there's a quick question there. Again, one that's gone through my mind from India. On average, how long do your CTJ meetings take?
I go for an hour, but I think you guys have heard I talk really fast as well, and I just get to the point. So when they come in, I'm like, hey, how you going? Let's get to it. No chit chat, no small talk. I don't beat around the bush. I don't go to the toilet till the end. I know sometimes when we have our planning days, we'll get out some food, we'll chill, talk about the weekend, all business. And you need to be when you get into that time so you don't get sidetracked, because I know we're time poor. We're absolutely time poor. We do have those planning days though. So sometimes that conversation that came from the CTJ meeting might spill over into our planning days. So when I'm working with you two at the moment, it even spills over from our professional learning. All those bits and pieces that we're learning from the CTJ meeting, the PL, and what we're getting out of the kids on that planning day, that would be more of our chill, relax. Yes, there's Tim Tams on the table to nibble on through the day and bring all of that stuff up. But the good thing is that when we have our planning days, we're doing them in the staff room, and those writing samples are all up there. So they're kind of in the forefront of our mind of, well, when we had this conversation and we saw this stuff with these kids and the gaps across here that we saw, this is why we're going to work towards blah. And so there's no real resistance around, well, I don't like doing this in writing. It's like, well, no, that's a need. We saw it when we had this conversation and these writing samples right here.
Thanks, Bec. Just while we're still with CTJ, last question, I think, before we might pull up stumps. How do you select the writing task for a CTJ? That's from another Robin, I believe.
Oh, so I leave that up to the team. So that's based on their scope and sequence for the year. If they've got something coming up. So for example, they might want to use a blind stimulus because we know our kids are preparing for NAPLAN and we just want to see how they go when that's not, spoon fed to them essentially. And that is no way, shape or form teaching to the test. This is just us going, our kids are from a a highly traumatic background, change scares them and, overwhelms them. And we just want to see how they go in this kind of scenario. So that might be the sample as well. So like I said, as long as the teachers who are assessing together have similar samples or a similar stimulus or topic that they've done together, I don't want to look at narrative from one teacher and then a persuasive text from another and then go, yeah, let's try and be consistent with this. I want narrative from both of them or something like that. So I leave that up to the team to decide what they want to do and just set those parameters.
Bec, thank you very much. What I would like to do at this point is, if I can, draw our Q&A to a close. Bec, and to thank you on behalf of everyone online today. Bec, thank you so much for your generosity, for your professionalism, for your example that you provided by giving us this deep dive into the work that you're doing in this space. You've provided some incredibly practical suggestions, ideas, approaches. You've flagged challenges, you've flagged opportunities, just a very, very practical and thoughtful approach. Thank you so much. Your responses to the questions that people have posted, and thank you to everyone who engaged in that way. Really practical and so much for us to all take away. We really do appreciate your time and sharing in this way. So thank you on behalf.
Not a problem. I'll share the slideshow with you in PDF form, so those links should work. And I think I'll share with you my creating text snapshots to the page if people want to use them for highlighting too. I'll send you a PDF of that to share, to send out to people.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bec. And to everyone still online, and there are lots of thank yous. Thank you for your feedback. Really appreciate it. We will post the recording and the resources. And as I said, any thoughts or ideas that are happening in the actual chat as well within the next week. I won't say tomorrow, but within the next week. So please look out for those in your inbox. We'll also post the recording on the Schools Plus website in our knowledge sharing hub. So you can point colleagues to that as well if they want to listen to Bec's presentation this afternoon. As I close up, it would be remiss of me also just to pass a big thank you to the Schools Plus team that work behind the scenes, particularly to Honor and Danny, who have helped bring the webinar together and supported us in the background tonight. So thank you to my two wonderful colleagues, Honor and Danny. Please look out for the next webinar as well in the showcase series. Alex Wharton and Donna Harvey, two of our 2021 fellows, and their focus very much will be around literacy in secondary settings. So please join us for that. It's the 26th of May, Thursday evening or afternoon, same time, and we'd love to see you there. So on that note, have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you for your participation. And once again, Bec, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.